I wonder, as a starting point for this conversation, if we can kind of catch our listeners up a little bit, if they haven't had a chance to follow your journey. Last time we recorded, you were going to study AI strategy and leadership with MIT, and I believe you have wrapped up
I
that
have.
that studies. What stood out to you from that experience? It sounds like an incredible opportunity.
Just the speed at which things are changing. And I don't think most people really understand how dramatic AI is and how it's going to change everything. And it's already changing. And just the speed at which things are changing. It is going, hotels have historically been pretty insulated, but this is the one thing that they're not going to be insulated from. It may come slower to hotels than other industries because we're more reliant on physical places and physical work. But everything that I learned, I mean, you fast forward to 5, and for sure 10 years from now, you are going to have a dramatic change in how hotels are operated and how consumers experience them.
I think we're getting into a number of elements of that in this conversation, but just to get meta for a moment, I am very curious about learning about new things, right? And I'm curious, I know you're such a lifelong learner, you learn so many different ways. What was it about the MIT experience that stood out to you as especially productive? Was there any approach they took you feel like you took away a lot from, was really helpful to learn about this?
Well, they definitely scare you into now. Because it's designed. The course I took is designed for CEOs and executives that are not like the CTO. And so there's a whole couple of weeks that you spend on security and the implications, and you know, just you have to have like a closed box system, particularly around large enterprises. And so just thinking about it, it can be beneficial, but it can be incredibly dangerous. So that was really eye opening. They had some security experts come in, and it makes you worry about having all your personal network digitized, and just the hacking and the capabilities that are happening. And so security is something we have to really think about. Um, I tend to be a half glass full kind of person, and I think pausing and thinking about the implications. I mean, they even get into some of the psychology about what does it mean for a blended workforce. If all of a sudden you're relying on AI so much, what does that do to critical thought? So that was really eye opening. And then, the thing that stood out to me was the guest lectures they had. The most powerful were actually the current PhD students. They were doing detailed research that they had come and present, because things are changing so fast that the curriculum was 3 or 4 months old. It was already outdated. So they had to come and actually have live guests, and they were doing research and sharing about their research. Actually, one guy is now a big Claude hire. He was doing his research PhD at MIT in AI and had done his like undergrad in machine learning. Um, and I actually tried to get the guy on my podcast, and he'd already signed his employment agreement with Claude and couldn't discuss anything. And we were like, they basically threaten you in the class, like, you can't take any of this. This is like this guy's PhD. But that I found to be the most helpful, because it was like real time learning, just to see how fast everything was changing.
Well, speaking of real-time learning, you just posted a clip of this. I'll include a link in the show notes. But with you and Roman Fadan talking about vibe coding, and you and I
Yeah.
have talked about vibe coding a little bit. But to this notion of things are moving so quickly, I don't know if you feel this way. I feel like the best way to learn about AI is just doing stuff, building stuff. And I've
Yes.
really spent some time every day for the last couple months vibe coding, because I find I learn. Do you feel the same? Do you feel like you're learning just by building stuff?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I,
What are you
I
making?
actually use it for the pod. So, anytime I have a guest on, I do all the research through AI. I have a context document that I feed it. So I do advisory services where I'm chairman of a SaaS company now. I then am the executive advisor for a pre-series A company, and I've started doing like this advisory work using my past CEO skills to help kind of new upcoming companies. And I actually have a context document for each one of those advisory agreements that every time I turn on Claude Code, I feed it the context document so it remembers everything. and then I go in and start doing analysis. Um, I mean, it's unbelievable. I actually have tinkered with the coding, both personal and professional. I actually, this past weekend, my son and I tried to create some code for a Roblox game using it. And which Roblox is kind of a closed system, so anybody listening and you try to do that with your kid, it's actually kind of difficult to do, but it was cool. I mean, literally, we're just in the context window telling it like a paragraph of what we wanted to do, and then watching it build the code.
I
So
love that. I want to talk a little bit more about the coding piece, but the use of Claude Code is interesting, and just the name itself I think scares a lot of people off. It seems
yeah,
like you got to be a programmer. We can get into this a little bit more, but that use case you alluded to, you're kind of wearing these different hats, these
yeah,
different roles that you're operating from, and for me, this has been the big shift in my own use of AI over the past what was it since November of 22. I feel like these chatbots I've treated by and large sort of like a glorified Google, and I've been going and asking things. And with Claude Code and other tools, there's an ability to save context, which is sort of a game changer, right?
yeah,
Because the memory persists over time.
right.
Um, how did you go about setting this up? Because it sounds like you have a context file for each of these different roles that you have. What did the setup look like?
Well, actually, so what I do before I actually, if I'm doing work, I'll actually ask Claude specifically, this is who I am in this scenario. So I'm an executive advisor for this pre-series A company. So I give it that context. And I say, this is the task or this problem we're trying to solve. Give me all the things that you need, all the context you need to provide this a optimal solution for. And then it'll feed me back. I actually did this morning. It gave me like 10 questions, and then I answered the questions, and I gave it bigger context. And then I said to it, create a full sequencing document for this using a certain type of sequencing, and then see where we made mistakes, correct it, and then question it again if you've made a mistake and correct it, and then publish it. And then it actually does like an iterative approach. And so that, I think you can't just feed it. It's an iterative context. But if you ask it what it needs for an optimal solution, it'll tell you.
Which is amazing because I
Yeah.
think this is a fairly recent development, at least as far as I'm aware of, because
Yeah.
each LLM is wired a little bit differently, right? And so I think in the past, when I've been trying to give context, sometimes I'll do a voice note or try to upload
Yeah.
documents. Sometimes those play a role, but it's not, more information isn't always better, right? So I think being very clear, here's the role, here's the outcome I need. What do you
Yeah.
need from me?
Yeah, and you can get token degradation within Claude. So, if you keep talking in the same, you'll actually get, and then eventually you may limit out if you're doing really big problem solving, because the context window still isn't infinite yet, although they're working on that. And so I actually will take like a document that I'm working on, and then I'll like the sequencing document. I have now like 10 versions of it, because what I'll do, I'll think of something, I'll feed the sequencing document in a Word document back to the LLM and say, this is the latest version. I want to work on A, B, C, D. And I want you to reframe it. Instead of thinking as a hotel CEO, I want you to think as a hotel owner, and give it, and then it'll reframe the document and fix the problems. That's actually when I created the document that is a prompting guide for hotel GMs. That was an iterative approach working with AI. I basically took my MIT coursework, created a base document, and then I worked with Claude to build it out over a couple of days. And that's how the end product ended up happening.
I think that's incredible. I'll include the link where people can learn more about that. But I am very curious. Uh, for the let's use this as an example for the general managers listening. I think
Yeah.
whether it is kind of with a system like this, or maybe this is a bridge into talking about vibe coding. Let's say
Yeah.
I'm running a hotel property. How
Yeah.
should I be thinking about this on property now?
Yeah.
In early 2026.
I think the two biggest things that is a hotel GM that are big unlocks that you can have, but you're going to have to work with, I don't want somebody going rogue and feeding it proprietary information. So you need to think about security protocols, because that really, because once you feed it to the LLM, what happens, right? If you have something's proprietary to the company, so you've really got to think through that. But if it's allowed within your company security parameters, what I do is I actually connect my Gmail. I have a note taker that feeds in the Claude. And then I have friends who use Slack a lot in their companies. They have their Slack channel, and it can basically help prompt and organize your communication, your calendar, almost like an executive assistant. And it can also do auto generation of emails, which I have it doing now that I don't have it automatically send them. So if you emailed me today, it'll actually go to Claude and it'll propose a suggested like a reply. And then I'll go in and I'd say half the time I'll tweak it and then send it. So it just makes me far more efficient. And you say, for a GM, you're probably getting, it's when I was hotel CEO, I was getting 400 emails a day. A GM's probably getting 50. It'll make you more efficient so you're not stuck in the office. The second thing that it can do that is really powerful, but again, you need to be very careful. I use it for financial modeling, and it can do everything from a discounted cash flow to if you have a profit and loss statement. If you are allowed to feed it that, if your company allows you can feed it and it'll do analysis for you. You can do basically like, if you do most profit and loss statements don't have GL code data. But you guys have Profit Sword. You could have some of that Profit Sword fed through an LLM, do some financial analysis. You could even, I've done some benchmarking using Claude, and I fed it multiple hotel statements that were, something I'm not worried about confidentiality around. And I said, compare these and, tell me what the, where in the rooms department we have some costs that are out of control, and it will spit back like some really powerful analysis. So I think it can be kind of the financial analyst and the executive assistant communication for a general manager to make them more efficient.
Super interesting. I mean, to our earlier point, security is really important. I think you need to talk with your legal counsel
Oh,
on what
for
this looks like in
sure.
your organization. At a minimum, though, it would shock you how many people I talk to that are using these free tools, which by default, I don't think you have an option to turn off the little toggle where it's like, I'm not going to allow this interaction to train your the models, right? So I think spend that $20 a month, even if it's on your own dime. These tools are powerful enough. Spend the $20, turn off the data sharing. Like at
Yeah.
a minimum, you need to be doing that. But it's interesting. I think I would love to get very tactical, Sloan. Like I think for connecting email, in your situation, are you using middleware for that? Is it direct Claude right into Gmail, or is there a middleware
I
solution?
actually do a direct Gmail in the Claude, but
Wow.
you can use like I think Otter and Fixer AI have like a middleware solution where it can even take your calendar, your Gmail, or if you're using Outlook, I use Gmail, and then it can basically funnel that, or you can do like a feed in the Claude. But I actually have Gmail going directly into Claude.
Interesting. I'm not
And I
doing this. I
think
was looking
there's
at middleware, and middleware is like maybe it's needed in some cases, but it seems like these technologies are evolving so that like it's becoming easier and easier.
you can do a direct integration with Claude now and Slack too. Because I have a good friend of mine who's we do a little business on the side, but I don't. He uses Slack for his company, and he was showing me, and it's not that hard to set up. So, but
Interesting.
I've never used Slack. I know a lot of companies do, but what he had set up and automated was like unbelievable.
As you've
So
been setting up and experimenting, what surprised you? Because it's like it's amazing to kind of have the idea of this. Was anything harder than you thought, easier than you thought?
I think that there's two things that I surprised me negatively that I think people need to be cognizant of, and the models are getting better. Is that the prior model of Chat GBT is really creative, but it will hallucinate a lot. The thing I like about Claude with technical writing is that if you specifically tell it not to hallucinate, it won't. Meaning it won't make things up. I was drafting some stuff for my newsletter, and I wanted very progressive companies outside of hotels that had used AI to automate workflows, and it made up. It gave me a couple of real ones, and then blended in a few and then it gave me actually false URLs. It created like fake URLs, and ChatGPT, because of how they premise it, it actually has a biasing system that it wants to please more often. Like Claude is actually more, Claude and a few others are more likely to tell you, I can't do that, or I don't know. But I always, if I'm doing something that is going to be in the public format, I always say, do not hallucinate. Make sure this is factual. Double check the work. Tell it that. So that is one lesson I've learned the hard way. And I would say ChatGPT, which is often is the most used by people, it actually hallucinates the most. And it's something they're working on, but it's a real problem. The second thing is that on the Claude Code side, what I found is that it needs very specific uh, uh, details on API integrations. So it can build something that's really cool, but you may not be able to compile it, or it may not actually work. Like you can feed it, you can literally feed it like a workflow and say, I want you to create an AI agent that's going to automate this, but then it can't integrate with anything. And so I think, there'll be these companies that are integrators, like you said, a middleware company that are very valuable. And that's, if you're trying to create something, the integrations are often more difficult, more technical. There may not even, for certain systems, like you think about a lot of PMS, there's PMSs in hotels today that don't even have an API. They just, so, if you're trying to build something that interacts with the PMS, a lot of times it won't work because of the integration. Those are the,
It feels like a whole other conversation, but I feel like that is going to be more and more of a risk if you're not able to integrate, because I feel like this will become table stakes. You're just going to want your LLMs to interact,
yeah,
and so we'll kind of see where this goes. But I think I I'm also kind of, this is why it's so important, I think, for those listening to us to be experimenting with this stuff, because I feel like you might read something or see something, and until you're actually building, you don't know what is actually true. And I mean, we're recording this at the end of February 2026, but if someone's watching this in a month, it might be different. So I
yeah,
think the evergreen takeaway here is you have to be building. And I think on the vibe coding side, you alluded to this earlier. This has been my experience. It's easy. You can tell an LLM to, create some dashboard or something like that. It can do it in seconds. The real hard part is the integrations of the data, the interactivity, because creating a front end, all these leading LLMs can do in seconds. And it looks beautiful, it looks magical. But actually making it interactive, workable software often requires a database. And so that was kind of something that's been interesting for me, is it's worth it in some cases, but I'm curious to hear more about what you're building, but I've been experimenting with everything from trying to do software builds to just like a daily email that's useful for me. And
yeah,
it's, for example, this is as of today, it's decently good at doing kind of web searches. It's not good at the specificity I need to make it an interesting email. And I think I'm testing all the LLMs, all the middleware. It's just like the technology isn't there to do it perfectly how I want it. I think
yeah,
that's probably going to evolve. But have
yeah.
you run into some of that stuff with kind of the building that you're doing?
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's where you have to know some of what you're exactly looking for in iteration. I think that's where, you know, if you look at like Claude Code, for example, vibe coding can create like a pretty decent like first iteration, but it's not going to create commercial grade product. You still need like an engineering team. Now that may eventually change. They may eventually become so good, but we're not there yet. The same is, if you use Claude to develop a new PowerPoint presentation, or you use Gamma too, which I've done that recently using both, I probably had to go in and edit 30%. So like it's a good base starter, but there's still, and I think there are AI that are good at different things. I think Claude is the best for technical writing, the best kind of overall LLM, the best for coding. But then I still think you have other, like Nano Banana, which is part of Gemini, is the best for image generation by far. You then have like Manus, Manus. If you haven't checked that out, check it out. That is the best at actually automating actual workflows. Um,
It's super
and
powerful. And I think this is
yeah,
where people have to be using it, because I've been experimenting with this the last couple of weeks. And it's interesting what it can do, but it raises questions that are maybe not immediately obvious. Because to do these workflows that I wanted, it can technically do it, but it's going to be thousands of dollars of tokens and credits. And so that's
Exactly.
where it's like you have to be in it, otherwise you just don't know that. I think before
Yep.
testing, I was sort of like, can it do it or not? And then there's a whole range of questions that emerge once you dig into it. It's like, is it worth paying this much? Is it worth waiting this long? You know what I mean? It's
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, like how the token cost comes down. And also I think, what is energy cost going to look like long term too? Because, I've seen projections that on the current that AI by 5 to 10 years from now will consume more than 50% of the world's energy. I mean, it's exponentially crazy that if you kind of run out. Now, I think they're solving some of that to make the models more efficient. So to do things, it doesn't take as much power. But that's a whole nother consideration that is like, what is the energy needed for this stuff to keep going up and to the right?
I don't know if you feel this way, Sloan, but I feel simultaneously very excited and energized. I find on flights now, I spend the whole flight vibe coding now because it's almost addictive. It pulls me in. I
Oh,
want to
for
make
sure.
things. It's so fun. At the same time, I feel that because our capabilities have increased, I feel so far behind and increasingly so. And so there's sort of like this fatigue and this sort of like, how do I stay in a mentally good place even as I am so excited about the capabilities? Do you feel any of that?
I guess to an extent, I feel like I'm so much further ahead than anybody, most people in hospitality. So that makes me feel better. When I was in the MIT class, there was a ton of people in healthcare that were there. There was a lot of people in the actual tech industry, if you will. A lot of SaaS business leaders, um, and so I was way behind them. But, we work in an industry, you and I do, that we love and we're not going to leave. And so I think I guess my anxiety is eased because you and I are probably in the top 10 percentile of adopters in this industry. But yes, if we compared ourselves to others, we may be mediocre. Um, I guess if we my point there is I feel pretty good when I think about it as a hotelier, thinking about it as a compared to everyone, yeah, we're a little behind, but it's just moving so fast. I mean, it was clear. It was really in the MIT course, the PhD students knew more than the professors because they were in the weeds on like the how things were changing. And the two professors that were the leads are, I think the one gentleman was probably 60 now, incredibly smart. He sits on like one of Google's boards, but he's not in it. And the PhD students are like doing all this research. So I found that's how fast things are moving.
One of the reasons I like talking with you, Sloan, is I can ask you CEO questions, right? You have kind of like this perspective of what does it take to lead effectively. And I feel like in the past, when it came to creating things, to lead, you didn't necessarily need to know how things were done specifically. But at the same time, I see you leaning into the technical details of doing things. Is this wave of innovation a little different? Would you encourage other CEOs to actually be vibe coding now, getting into the details just so they can understand the true capabilities of what's possible, or is that not really needed?
I think so there's a theory, I forget who coined it, that, if you look at most business of the future, that most value is going to reside in innovative, smaller companies. And you also look at what's happening from branding. People are branding themselves, right? That's partly what I'm doing, right? Like Not Done is my brand. Friends of Sloan Dinners is part of my advisory brand. And you're seeing that more. And so I do think in a new world of AI where IQ is faster, you can tokenize it, that individual contribution matters more. Okay. And smaller companies are going to be leaner, meaner, are going to disrupt legacy industries. And so having capabilities that are broad and deep individually matters more. And so if you want to learn in this, whereas I was CEO of a large 10,000 employer hotel company, I got to a point, and I think a lot of leaders do this. You're really good at solid at your job, and you maybe aren't learning as much. But I think in this new world, if you really want to evolve and survive, you do need to understand. I'm not saying I'm going to go be the head engineer of any company. I don't have that capacity, but you have to have enough of a technical know-how to be able to if you go start a company, you're also the chief product officer, which is what Brian Chesky did at Airbnb, right? Like he understands technically enough and he created a ton of value. If you look at the companies that are leaning in and growing exponentially, you tend to have some pretty technical expertise or a really good understanding of the consumer by the leader at the top. And that is changing. I mean, I think the old day of large companies, um, like General Electric and things like that, where you have like a leader at the top that you just have today's business. The leader has to know more and be more capable. And AI is leveling that out to make you more efficient, to increase your capacity to learn areas, right? And so I think this is the new leader. That if you want to be a CEO in 2035, you better be very astute at AI and understand how that's impacting the business. And I think that's actually where a lot of leadership in the hotel industry is going to get upended. We're going to have a whole wave of old guard that need to kind of sunset. And I don't mean that in a mean way. That's just part of the evolution of business. And I don't want to, I'm 44, I'm going to be 45 in May. I don't want to be part of the old and a big wave crash on top of me. So I just see this coming and I'm trying to be part of it rather than have the wave take me out, if you will.
It's awesome to see you leaning in and learning and building and being not done as your brand's all about. I will come back to AI, but I want to spend a few more moments talking about leadership. My understanding is you were at a YPO event last night, and
Right.
there was some things that you observed about leadership. And I would love to hear you share with our listeners what stood out to you, because I want us all to level up in our leadership capabilities, and I'm curious what you heard.
Yeah, so I'm gonna plagiarize a little bit of not in a illegal way, but of the gentleman that actually led the event. So YPO is Young Presidents Organization. I'm part of YPO DFW here in Dallas. One of the best things that I've done for myself in my career. And last night we had a guy. He's Australian conductor. His name's Russell Gurr. Super talented guy, and he does a conductor's perspective on business called Deconstructing Conducting. And it was really quite interesting. So for an hour, he has an orchestra in front of him and he will take you through like a Beethoven piece. But then he stops and talks about the application to business. And there was kind of 5 or 6 themes that really stood out to me. As one, that unless he's talking to the audience to explain something, the conductor during an entire performance does not speak, right? It's all hand motion, gesture, energy. Doesn't make the only person in the whole entire orchestra that doesn't make a sound. And I think if you correlate that to business or to the CEO, is that the CEO is not the sales leader closing the deal. They're not the GM checking the guest in. They're not the housekeeper making the bed. And so you have to lead through people. And in a conductor's world, they don't even use words. It's all eye contact and intentionality. And I found that so powerful, that kind of reframe. The second thing that he really he mentioned is, a conductor in the performance is the only one who's often not facing the crowd. Their backs to the crowd. They're facing their team. And I thought that was a really powerful statement too, that sometimes as a CEO, you get too caught up in what's going on in the public markets, and it really should be about leading through your team. And that's where your attention and energy should go. It's almost like you turn your back on the crowd. And that doesn't mean you don't forget about your customers and those kind of things. But, let's be honest, a CEO doesn't really interact with the customer, particularly in large companies, right? And then he talked about how command kills and connection creates. That, as a conductor going to conductor school, they actually have schools for this. I didn't know that they teach you about how to coach and counsel people, and that, in a performance, you can't stop and scold the first chair of the violinist because they messed up, right? You have to empower them and believe in them, and that you know that their skill level at that position is better than you at the conductor. You're just a generalist, and you respect that. And the other thing that he talked about is that in a typical orchestra, you have about 100 people. And so where they're placed actually has influence on how you interact with them. And that they're taught in conducting school to start at the periphery and scan around and actually look to the deepest person and then work their eyes back. And that level of intentionality with eye movement, I just thought, if we brought that level of intentionality to the workplace every day, I mean, think how amazing you would be as a leader. And so, anyways, it made me think, maybe the C and CEO should stand for conductor. And so I'm going to go read about conductors. And there's some great quotes by famous conductors. And I actually asked the question I asked him, are conductors born? Because some of it seems innate. And there's this debate if some of it can be taught versus some of it being innate. But it was really mind blowing how he would take you through a song, stop, deconstruct it, and explain it. And I just thought it correlated perfectly to business.
I love so many elements of that, Sloan. I think we can learn so much from other industries, other art forms, other people. And I think also putting yourself in that environment at YPO, right? I think there's a lot our listeners can learn. And I know from your own personal professional journey that you've shared with me, I'll include a link in the show notes where you've shared some of the things you had to overcome to operate that way as a leader. It doesn't happen overnight, right? A lot of inner work, a lot of practice to get there. But I think it's a great analogy.
We all have egos, and it tends to be, if you're at the top, you probably have one of the biggest, because that's part of the reason you got there, because you thought you were better than everybody else. Self-confidence has a direct correlation to job performance. And so it's weird because you get to be the CEO because you're one of the most talented people, but you've got to let go of all of that if you really want to be transformative. And I think that it's just a really hard thing to do, because the human ego is a powerful thing, and we all have them. And most CEOs have bigger ones than most everybody else. So trust me, I know from firsthand experience. I'm looking in the mirror here, and it's a very hard thing to do. You know what? I'm going to use this conductor as a reframe in a lot of my advisory work. I really love sports analogies, like the coach and the player and that kind of thing. I used to use that a lot at Remington. But I tell you, I was just absolutely blown away. It's probably one of the best work analogy experience that I can think of.
I love it. Before we go, Sloan, I want to kind of bring this into your world today, some of the things that you're seeing and observing. And, I guess maybe as a way into that, I'm very curious, since launching your show. I mean, you've always talked to CEOs, to leaders, to innovators across the, not just hospitality, but I know in the world of technology and other industries. But I am curious, since launching Not Done, is there something that comes to mind on something that you've changed your mind on? That you had so many conversations. Any of those kind of cause you to think of the things a little bit differently, change your mind in some way?
Yeah, it really has. A couple things come to mind. One, I think loyalty programs are going through this big evolution that nobody appreciates, and is going to change dramatically. I think actually AI and technology and the younger generation preferencing is leading to a world where loyalty is not as important. Meaning that your loyalty programs are being diluted, like the value thereof. And I think if you look at the behavior of the large hotel chains that have become loyalty plays, they recognize that, because what happens when something is more of a commodity, you tend to try to become big. So you have more scale and more leverage, right? It's what happened in the airline industry. It's what happens in other industries, happen with retailers. So if you don't really have a key differentiator, one of the key things is you branch out into, ancillary other things that are not your core business. And then you try to get bigger, because then you become almost too big to fail. And I think if you look at loyalty programs in the United States, you have credit cards, you have airlines, you have hotel. We're going through this period where I think there's going to be massive disruption caused by that, by AI. And I don't think anybody fully appreciates it. But if you look at the behavior of what I think are some amazing companies like Marriott and Hilton as examples, they're racing to get much, much bigger. And that should tell you something. So that's one thing that I've really kind of learned. And I just reframed how I think about loyalty long term. And then I look at my children's preferencing and put that in the context. And the younger generation definitely are far less loyal than even us, and definitely less loyal than our parents. And so part of that is the evolution of the consumer too.
I am curious, Sloan, because I feel like for these big brand companies, that is one of, if not the biggest value proposition that
Yep.
they've had for owners, for franchisees, right? And
Yep.
so, if this dynamic continues, is this an opportunity? You mentioned there is this push to just get bigger and bigger faster, but there's a limit to that. Do you feel like we're also going to see the value proposition of these big brand companies evolve because of this
Yeah.
dynamic?
They're having to. I mean, that's
Hmm.
why you have, I think Marriott is a tremendous company. I respect the hell out of Tony and the Marriott family and what they've done. I mean, there's a reason they're getting into yachting. There's a reason that they now launch Marriott Media. They have to go into other areas because they know that that core business is at risk. And that loyalty program over time is not going to have the teeth that it does today. Consumers are just changing how they buy and why they buy. And all of a sudden, if AI can curate a very customized, personalized stay experience, are you just going to go stay somewhere because you earn points? Argumentative. But I think that's very much in smart intention by them to get in, to have stickiness in other areas. And I think we'll continue to see that
Well, I
across the
think that
board.
trend becomes interesting if you start to see more creativity, right? And hospitality companies branching into other offerings. So I think that's definitely something I get
Well,
excited about.
let me have it. You think about it in a different way. So think about loyalty is currency. So think about it in that way. No one thinks, but think about it that way. And you have credit card loyalty points. That's a currency. You have airline points. That's a currency. You have hotel points. That's a currency. You have crypto. Now that's a currency. And then you have the money supply of traditional money. Um, if you look at it, most hotel loyalty programs have uh, devalued their currency over a period of time. And so, do you put value? I think that's a real problem, right? You look, the airlines have done the same thing, right? So, what is the value of that loyalty system if you continue to devalue the currency? Now, it's almost the same argument you should have around the American dollar, right? Like if the American dollar is the currency of the world, but if we continue to deflate the value of that, that causes implications. I mean, the same can be said about loyalty. It's basically a currency. And I think that's the problem with most loyalty programs is over a long period of time, they devalue themselves and that currency loses value. And I think we've seen that time and time again.
Very interesting. Before we move on, you mentioned there's a couple things that you've changed your mind on. Was there
Yeah.
another thing that
Yeah.
comes to
There's
mind?
another big one. And the big one was I wasn't sure who would win the AI game. Right? Like, is it zero sum? And first, I think, Tony Capuano said this, and I agree with him. He said it's not going to be zero sum, meaning there's not one true winner or one true loser. Um, I think, though, is unless hotel owners and hotel operators wake up in the next couple of years, what you have seen really over the last 5 or 6 years is what I call the value leakage model. It's what Elliot IHG coined, that everyone that's asset heavy is the sucker in the room. And it's the Uber model that everyone that doesn't actually own the hotel is making a lot of money. And I think if you look at, you would think AI would give some value back to the hard asset owner. And I'm hopeful for that because for the sustainability of the industry. But everything that I've learned suggests to me that the biggest winners, if you just take the current players on the table, right? I think first, there will be huge, massive winners that we're not even thinking of that AI is going to make in the travel space. Companies you don't know today that are smaller. I mean, you just saw Muse raise 300 million. I'm not saying they're one of them per se, even though they're valued at 2.5 billion. But there are new entrants that are going to win massively. Secondly, I think the OTAs become even more powerful. Although I think there's an argument that you could say AI circumvents them, but they have the largest, best data structure, which really matters. Data in this new world is more valuable than anything, and they have the largest amount of it. And that is very, very valuable. And if you look at their booking over the last several quarters, they're gaining more market share than they ever have. Okay. So they're going to keep winning. I think the hotel brands are at big risk. And I think owners and operators are at risk, either being put out of business or having this value leakage go away from them. And it's really, you say, well, then where does that value go? It goes to the booking channels and it goes to technology companies. And I think if you look at every industry, technology ends up being the largest value company. You look at retail, now it's Amazon. They're a technology company. You look at media, it's Netflix. They're a technology company. So it's coming to travel. We still will have hard physical places, real estate companies, but that's where I think the value goes is technology companies win in this new world. We're in a digitized world where the value transfer is technology. Used to in the U.S. economy, it was like manufacturing was where all the value resided. Then we became a services economy. Now we're a technology AI economy, and that's where the value is going to transfer.
With that being said, I guess my closing question is one kind of based on where you are today. You have an incredible career in hospitality, and now you're involved in a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is in the hospitality and travel ecosystem. And I guess kind of based on what you just said, I'm curious, what draws you to this world of travel and hospitality, kind of all the places you can build and innovate and work and build relationships? Why focus here?
I'm an ENTJ on Myers-Briggs. I come from a family of two very extroverted parents. On the E side, I'm 99th percentile. So I had my entire leadership team go through it. I'm one of these folks that I don't get energy by being by myself. I get energy. That's why doing the podcast is easy, right? It's just like talking. Because I love it. I mean, I love people and I love traveling to new places. It's like my addiction. And so that's this industry, right? So do what you love. And I really hope that we can, there's an essence of hospitality that's human to human. I do think eventually robotics and AI become good enough that it's like we're a blended population if we don't kill ourselves. But I do think there's an essence, at least in our lifetime, that, people want to be hosted by other people. And I really absolutely love seeing new places. And so I am a hotelier hospitality person for life. I'm not going to change. And that, I think, starts with that 99th percentile extroversion.
Well, I love it, Sloan. I very much enjoyed this conversation. If people want to hear more of your thoughts, encourage them to check out the Not Done podcast. Follow you on LinkedIn. Links in the show notes. You have a big library already after starting Not Done not that long ago. I guess for people who are brand new to your show, is there a couple episodes maybe you would point people to as a starting point? I include some links in the show notes. Any kind of gateway episodes you suggest?
Yeah, obviously, the big names draw big listenership. So, Tony Capuano at Marriott and Chris Silcock at Hilton and Pat Pacious at Choice is coming out next week. I think there's some really good contrarian thought from Ben Rafter, who is a technologist, startup guy who ended up running hotels. I think he's really bright. He's a good friend. I think the capital markets conversations with Ryan Melliker and Greg Friedman are really, like, if you're a hotel operator or just want to know how hotel owners or capital markets work, they're great listen tos as well. And Ryan and I get a little bit in the weeds, if you will, on capital markets. So if you're a bit of a finance junkie, you might enjoy that one. Those are probably some call outs. I've had some tech CEOs on too, which is really cool. I had Adam Harris of Cloudbeds, and actually I'm recording Richard Valtar, the founder of Muse, on Monday. So I thought maybe if I have him on the podcast, once he buys his yacht with all that new money, he'll have me on. So.
Seems like a good strategy. I always love listening to each episode that comes out. So Sloan, thanks for taking time to chat. I'll include links to the show notes. Encourage people to,
Thank you.
to
Thank
check
you
out
for
the
being
show.
such
Follow
a
you.
good friend. I
Likewise.
admire you, and you were part of the inspiration for me doing this. So I look at what you're doing, and some of it I try to. They say plagiarism is the greatest. It's like flattery, right? So, anyways,
Well,
thank
you're
you for being a good
creating
friend.
incredible stuff, Sloan. I appreciate that. It means a lot.